Ми швидко і не вміємо.
Вельмишановні панове,
Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, esteemed clergy, I would like to welcome you in the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. We're here to discuss the topic Cuba Declaration, Next Steps for Ukraine. Soon there will be a mission on how was it happening in Havana, where the Pope and the Patriarch Kirill met. All the emotions quieted down in mass media, and now I believe the time has come to assess the event, what consequences it may have for Ukraine, and I would like to suggest the following format of the discussion. I would suggest that each of you expresses your opinion within 3-4 minutes as to this Havana meeting, and after that we will think about what to do with that next. We have the representatives of clergy and also the scholars. We don't have the representative of Kyiv Patriarchate here. Andriy Zielinskiy is the military chaplain from Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, also Victor Yelenskiy, religious scholar, MP, chairman of the Subcommittee on the State Policy in the Sphere of Freedom of Speech and Religious Organizations, also Ludmyla Filipovych, religious scholar, head of the History and Religion and Religious Practice at the Institute of Philosophy of Ukraine. Also, Petro Baloha, Deputy Director of the Thomas Aquinas Institute of Religious Sciences, and Volodymyr Burega, Rector of the Kyiv Theological Academy. I would like to suggest that you start, Father Petro, take 3-4 minutes to express what is your opinion on this meeting. Thank you for this opportunity. I will try to say what I think about that declaration, this joint declaration. First of all, I would like to underscore that this is the joint declaration. Usually in the joint declaration, unfortunately, there should be things which are missing there, but many expected. Here, there are certain things missing which we could have expected if it were not the joint declaration, but the declaration of one side. The second thing I see is that the meeting that took place in Havana, I believe, is not just like meeting by chance. I did not imagine that the meeting would be I could not imagine that such a meeting between the Pope and the Patriarch of Orthodox Church, which was being prepared for so many years, would take place somewhere in the airport. So basically it was mentioned that this meeting was prepared for 20 years. For the Rome it doesn't matter where it would take place. When the Claudia Gugerotti, the nunciate ambassador, told in Ukraine, when he was asked what would you say about that meeting, he said, everyone will forget about the declaration, but people will remember just the fact of the meeting. Now a month has passed and no one remembers the meeting itself, the hugs, but people are still discussing the declaration. My personal attitude to this meeting or declaration could be divided into two parts. There was a meeting, and we do not know what the Patriarch and the Pope were talking about. All knew that that was the conversation between brethren, but the declaration is something that everyone could read. Declaration is quite ambiguous. There are many interpretations, very opposite ones. Besides being a joint declaration, many things are not mentioned there. Many people say it would be better if there were no declaration, and we can argue about that. We can argue about the text of the declaration. We can look for some positive things in the declaration, but the negatives is always like these items 25, 27, and that is what Ukraine, especially Greek Catholics in Ukraine, paid attention to, so they are of importance. So we have what we have. We can just look forward to having another declaration, and I hope that the next meeting they will take care about where and when, because such a meeting should produce some very specific fruit, because I believe that after that meeting maybe there will be some positive fruit, but also there will be a lot of negative fruit. And so this way this meeting will not result in anything but and it will not be like the meetings between the Pope and the patriarchs of other churches, because the previous meetings they did produce a lot of positive, but I'm convinced that this meeting is resultless. We do not see any fruit of the meeting. It took place not where it had to take place and not in the wrong time. So thank you, Father Petro. Volodymyr, what were the results of this meeting for the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchy? I would like to mention one background information. Meeting of the Pope with the head of the Orthodox Church is nothing unprecedented. Since 1960s, we see how the contacts between Orthodox and Catholics became more active, and there were meetings of Patriarch Volodymyr with the Pope, with the three previous popes. John Paul II met with the Patriarch of Georgia and Romania, and while Patriarch Kirill was a metropolitan, he met with the Pope Benedict XVI and John Paul II. There is a certain tradition, and we need to understand that what happened was the first meeting at such level between the head of Moscow Patriarchy and the Pope, but we need to understand that there is some previous history. Since 1960s, the Russian Orthodox Church was maintaining quite active relations with the Roman Catholic Church, and the Patriarch Kirill was involved into such contacts. He's the pupil of Metropolitan Nicodim Rotov, and we can say that for Patriarch Kirill, meeting with the Pope is the result of his all previous activity. The contacts between Moscow Patriarchy and Vatican were quite active in the 1970s and 80s, only in 1990s and in 2000 years. These contacts worsened. The Ukrainian factor and Greek Catholics was just one factor that worsened the relations. There was a scandal with opening Catholic churches on the territory of Russian Federation, and the Russian Orthodox Church reacted to that very actively. So Patriarch Kirill is trying to return to the contacts with the Rome, with the Vatican, to the situation that existed in the 80s. So there is a certain prehistory. Personally, for the Patriarch Kirill, this is the continuation of the situation that existed in the 1970s, 1980s, when he was being educated. The Patriarch Kirill has a very powerful experience of inter-church diplomacy, but the Pope doesn't have such experience. Another factor that needs to be remembered: the meeting took place within a very specific political context. Today, we see that the state of Russian Federation, the Kremlin, is in a certain international insulation. As soon as such international insulation happens, they are starting looking at the channels along which they can maintain the contacts with the Western world. And traditionally, church or clerical ecumenic contacts have always been such channel of communication. And when the relations between political leadership of the Soviet Union and the West, when they were very difficult, then proportionally the church contacts were developing more actively. Now we see difficulties in political contacts, and we see how church contacts are getting more active. That is a reflection of the political situation. That's one of the channels of supporting contacts with the West, and in a certain sense we see at least the attempts on behalf of Russian Church to restore the paradigm of relations with the Catholic Church that existed till the beginning of 1990s. But because of certain reasons it was frozen. But now different factors allow us to go back to that. And what seems to be a paradox is that we see quite aggressive anti-Western rhetoric from Russia and from Moscow Patriarchy, but at the same time the Pope, who's the leader of Western Christianity, meets with the Patriarch, and the declaration shows how it is interpreted by Moscow. the processes of secularization that are taking place in Western Europe are, first of all, related to Protestants, and Catholics are considered to be allies of Orthodox in fighting with the Protestants. So on the one hand, Western, anti-Western rhetorics, but on the other hand, they're looking for the ways of how to oppose the Christianizing Europe, which is another challenge, and that could be also answer to the question why the Pope agreed to the meeting. He has his own reasons to look for the union, to look for a new ally, which would be Russian Federation. So if we look at that from different contexts, we need to take that all into account, because this general context, especially in first 7 items of the declaration, could be felt that is how the relations between churches are interpreted, how do they perceive the future. But as to Ukrainian context, I believe we will discuss it in the second part. Thank you, Vladimir.
Now I give the floor to the Father Andriy Zielinskiy. He is famous because he's military chaplain. He's at the front line. And now, Father, could you please share with us your thoughts how Ukrainian militaries thought about this declaration? First of all, I would like to say that the meeting is always a attempt of the dialogue. It's always an attempt to renew the communication. And it's not a secret that if in any context of the communication at any level, when all the possibilities are finished of the rational communication, when people can't talk to each other, when people can't find common language, war starts as arguments of force prevail. So the meeting is always positive. And my colleague told already, this is an attempt to break some historical problems, to break the past, if you want. Regarding the reaction of this meeting among the militaries, in particular of the militaries of Greco-Catholic Church, there are 2 moments, 2 worrying moments. First, close, that's for sure. The moment of interpretation of what is happening in Ukraine now. And in declaration, it is expressed in the clause number 26, and the term used it is called hostility in English. As you see, there is a little different nuance, but in Russian version, it is called contradiction. And here, what I could hear from Ukrainian militaries of our church, the logic of the soldier works very simple. This is my Ukrainian land. I'm the defender of Ukraine. I'm the defender of my motherland. On my motherland, there are Russian tanks, Russian artillery, Russian soldiers. Russian tanks, Russian artillery, and Russian soldiers are shooting now. And their presence is not legitimate because they were not elected on the territory of Ukraine. And the presence of somebody else's military equipment, military technique, what is it if not military aggression? What is it if it's not the war? And the other question, and there was other issue that wasn't clear, and we can't solve it for 2 years already of the conflict. And now it was catalyzed by this meeting in Havana. And now I'll give you direct quote of one of my friends. He's an officer of Ukrainian army. I called him once, and in our telephone conversation, he told it in Russian. I understand there are people there also. I understand they need priests. But why these priests are shooting us? So what do I want to tell you? For Ukrainian militaries, it's not very clear this context, but in declarations there are some nuances that churches should help the process of peacekeeping, peace regulation of the conflict. But Ukrainian militaries, Ukrainian soldiers who defend their people today, who defend their country today, who is the defender of the motherlands, he is blessed by the representatives of Ukrainian churches for defense of his motherland from people who are with weapons in their hands, presented in Ukraine illegally. Their troops are here, and they are also blessed by the representatives of the Church of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate. And so there is a question. I just share with you their concerns, what we can hear in their troops. If we are blessed for the defense of our motherlands, what about the blessing from other side? Because they're not shooting just militaries, they're shooting civil population as well. In any case, the head of Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, is Patriarch Kirill, and having all the spiritual potential. Why there is no simple appeal? Militaries are asking me. Why there is no such appeal to the representative of illegal military formation, to the soldiers of Russian Federation? Why they don't just tell them, give up your arms? Because peace is very simple in actual Ukrainian realities. And after that, we need to talk to each other. After that, we need to renew the peacekeeping process, the process of communication. So these are two main concerns of our militaries. Now I'm calling you about the militaries who go to our Greco-Catholic Church and how they understood the interpretation of the declaration, at least according to the version that was in media. Thank you very much, Father, for your evaluation. Victor, and could you be a kind of independent expert today? Could you please evaluate the events in Havana? You know, starting from at least the Pope John Paul II, representatives of Rome wanted to meet Moscow Patriarch, and they didn't have this possibility because Moscow refused. Moscow was talking about proselytism. Moscow was talking about destroyed eparchies in the Western Ukraine, and the Pope Benedict XVI, he wanted to build openly some kind of conservative international. He was appealing to Moscow Patriarch. He was appealing even to Muslims. But still, this meeting didn't happen. The meeting became possible when Moscow didn't have any other possibility to break the isolation. It is from one side. But from other side, the president of Russian Federation has his special views on the meeting with the Pope, because he thinks that after the death of Mahatma Gandhi, he doesn't have anybody to talk to. Obama and Merkel can't talk to him on equal terms. But the spiritual leader of the Western world is a person he can compete in intellectual exercises. That's why in this meeting, from Russian side, there was one client, one viewer, one listener. It is the President of Russian Federation who blessed the Patriarch for this meeting. And before this meeting on Cuba, it wasn't possible, but Vatican side was ready for this meeting for many years already. Second, Patriarch Kirill is trying, and he's a little softer than Kremlin politics, at least at the beginning of the Russian aggression to Crimea, Russian intervention to Crimea, but now these small differences are practically absent. Patriarch is completely go following the Kremlin politics, and it's very important for Patriarch to prove to Kremlin his efficiency, his needness, his ability to solve some tasks abroad. And that's exactly what he was doing during Havana meeting. I don't know about Pope, I don't know about his counselor. Do they understand or not that it's not that they're dealing not just with religious leaders, they are also dealing with very high rank official diplomat who is just wearing the clothes of the Patriarch. But Pope finds it's possible to change the day-to-day needs into some eternal requirements, and he's trying to do it because it's a kind of millennium anniversary. And when they are telling that it's first meeting in 1,000 years, I can tell that maybe even in 2,000 years, because Moscow Patriarchate don't exist for 2,000 years. So the Pope is changing day-to-day issues into geopolitical. But the issues of eternity, the issues of Christian unity, most probably it's written in Vatican language, and about conflict in Ukraine, maybe it's written in the language of Moscow Patriarch, and it's very probably that it is written in Moscow Patriarch, but it was adjusted by Vatican side. But I think even in the eternal issue, even in inter-Christian Christian relations, this declaration is not fundamental, because on my view, Moscow doesn't treat it seriously. We can see the critics from the side of the most critical roles of the Moscow society, from monks, from some other secular layers, that say that there is Orthodox Church and there is a society breaking its relationships with this unique Orthodox Church. And there are some signs from the curtain, behind the curtain. They say that it's just in TV. This meeting is required for today's needs. In declaration, there are things that are not true. For example, the constatation of blooming of religious freedom in Russia, it's not true at all, because me, as a head of religious organization in Ukraine, I'm following the events with religious freedom all over the world, and almost every week there are news from Russia about the destruction of the religious homes, about the priests of other religions that were arrested, other crimes that happen almost every week. And I don't even tell you about the things happen on the territories occupied by Russia. because there are even massacres of the priests, as it happens in Donbass, also persecution of Muslims. Even European Parliament told about it. The persecution of Muslims in Crimea, tortures and other crimes. There is a long list of churches of other confessions that were taken from their owners, so the occupied territories, and now there are barracks and other kind of buildings, and even they teach how to kill in these buildings now. And famous journalist Ostrovsky even filmed a movie about it. And Father Petro told us already we are going to discuss this conflict, so-called conflict in Ukraine. Of course, for Ukrainians, it can't be accepted because the Vatican, for sure, Vatican knows the results of all the surveys, reports, documents from UN, documents of European Parliament, Parliament Assembly of the Council of Europe, and Russia is called aggressor on all these documents, European Commission and all other European bodies. Unfortunately, Vatican didn't put any attention to this fact. And what about Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church? I think it's not fair because why this church was persecuted during 50 years? Because it was faithful to Vatican. Any bishop didn't distrust Rome. They didn't break their relationships. They didn't start a relationship with Kyiv Metropolitan. And now to treat the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church a kind of small coin that can be sacrificed for some fantasy Christian unity is not fair. I know that Pope Francis had the views of Ukrainian community, and I, together with all of us, hope his views on the events in Russia, in Ukraine, on the occupied territories will evolutionate.
Thank you, Victor, for your assessment. Ludmyla, now from the point of view of scientific point of view, what would you say? We were with interest following what was happening in Havana, in the original and then in translation. We read the declaration attentively, but there are some scholars who welcome this event and they perceive the declaration positively. There are those who criticize not 25, 26, 27, but all the items. There is the position expressed by Yaroslav Gricak. He says, let's ignore, as if for Ukraine it doesn't matter whether it is there or it isn't there. Ukraine will be developing in accordance with the internal laws of religious life which have been developed within these 25 years. Every scholar has the right to have own position, but once you are a scholar, you have to follow certain methodological approaches when studying such texts as declaration. But that means that you have to be objective. You have to treat it objectively with care, looking at the reasons, seeing and predicting the consequences. So there are different problems related to that. I don't think we will exaggerate the role of this declaration, but we have to say that the meeting of the Pope and the Patriarch of Russian Orthodox Church took place for the first time, even though they are talking about millennium, but In fact, Moscow Patriarchy has been in existence since the 15th century. It was recognized a little later, so they could be talking not about millennium, but half of the millennium. In many interpretations of the meeting, I believe one thing is lacking, and I did not hear that from the representatives of churches. Everyone talks about political component of the meeting, and I believe that there is a very fundamental approach, fundamental opinion, which is that there are people who believe met, so we should consider that to be the dialogue between the representatives of two most powerful branches of Christianity. The Pope has a huge community behind him, and the Patriarch of Moscow has many people behind him. Another thing is how the situation will be perceived by Catholics and Orthodox. It will be probably easier for the Pope to answer the questions asked about Catholics and Greek Catholics, but it will be much more difficult for Patriarch Kirill, because he belongs to this part of religious leaders who were brought up on the ideas of communism, with the background of the general episcopate. He looks to be non-standard and very progressive, and we see the first reaction when some people refuse to mention the name of the Patriarch in liturgy. I saw different round tables, for example, which demonstrate that the Russian Orthodox Church explanations, they change. Now they were saying that Catholicism originated from the word cat, which meant the torturer, and now they have to explain, but how will we now explain why we were hugging? And it looks quite ridiculous. The declaration will live its own life, and religious life will follow its own laws, own periods of time. We have to live this time through. But what is important for us? I believe this is for Ukraine, even though Ukraine wasn't present there. It is important for us that some hot topics which have importance for all churches were discussed there. It was interesting to read what was called important hot points. We see that Europe, which was criticized, and even Latin America is mentioned, the Middle East, Northern Africa, and the topic of Eastern Europe was also discussed separately. By that, they mean Russia and Ukraine and Eastern Europe and other countries. What was required, the declaration really condemns the terrorism and other things. The declaration is very uneven. I mean the content The first part of the declaration was very well drafted in advance, but talking about political nature, I believe that was probably suggested by Russia. Let us look at how events continue. But the discussion of the declaration is over as to Greek Catholic Church. There's no more historic discussion on whether it can exist or not. I don't think this church will be used as an argument to prove that there could be no relations between Catholics and Orthodox. And I believe it is very important that Ukrainians are now treated as historic aspects. They were not afraid of the Pope or Moscow Patriarch, and they protested against items 25, 26, 27 of the declaration. We know that in the Western Europe there were protest marches and letters were written. There was a letter written by the students of Kyiv Catholic University. They requested the Pope to come to Ukraine and see whether there is some confrontation or whether it is an aggression. We'll see how events develop, but I would like to say that much depends on us, how we react, what we believe is dominating, what will be declared by us, and also whether the leaders of two religious communities, the declaration, what was signed, whether this will turn into specific deeds. Thank you. Now we have Taras Antoshevskiy via Skype, Director of the Religious Information Service of Ukraine. Can you hear us? The format is like that. In the first part of the discussion, everyone has the chance to express their opinion on Havana Declaration. I would like to request you as a person from media, to assess the reactions in mass media. Maybe there was some criticism after the declaration was signed. I'm sorry, I could not hear what my colleagues were saying, but the reaction was quite interesting. We could see the characters of people. We could understand what's happening in heads of people. Some people were looking at positive and negative things. Some were saying, okay, now they will liquidate Greek Catholics. They were saying that this will be liquidated by Russian Patriarchy. So the reaction was different, and the most important thing is that there was a lot of reaction. Not a single document would cause such a reaction in social networks. The work with the Joint Commission was of more interest because it's on fundamental communication between Catholics and Orthodox in Ukraine. The population probably did not know about what was happening. And very often they were saying that Ukrainian position hasn't been taken into account. Very often they were saying why Ukrainians were not represented there by Greek Catholics, by Orthodox. The church is to be represented at such meetings. There was a PR campaign. Everyone was trying to say something. But it was interesting to follow what Russian media were writing about, and I understood that the Ukrainian side was saying that we lost everything, but from Russia they were saying also that we lost everything. We need to withdraw. We do not know what to do, but something is to be done. That was interesting. Probably the opponents of the declaration were to be put together so that they understand that they are having different positions but have similar comments to the declaration. So I believe that the declaration is some sort of a compromise, but just look at what declaration means. Declare doesn't mean that this is obligatory. That means that they just declare. There was a discussion in mass media. We shouldn't be panicking, and there is some quieter reaction now. Some people say, how could this discussion be used with benefit? How to force Russian Orthodox Church to recognize that in Russia the Catholics could feel free so that they do not depend on Orthodox environment. They, Greek Catholics in Russia are considered to be beyond the law because there's no Greek Catholic church in Russia. There are Roman Catholic churches in Russia, and they are formally approved. There are certain things which are very good for Kyiv Orthodoxy. And basically, this reaction from it being too bad, they gradually move towards another type of conversation. Let's analyze it and let's see what we can do. Now, people are more interested in what concerns them every day, but not some declarations. And practically now, in social networks, they are talking about it when they want to start some discussion. I believe that the declaration will be assessed later, and the main thing is that there was this first meeting. Russian Church wasn't very active the first 100 years of its existence, and later, being the ministry, it wasn't within the context of inter-agency dialogue, and so we will see what will be happening between Vatican and the Kremlin. We should understand that Russian propaganda has a very big influence on Vatican. We need to recognize that. Thank you, Taras.
And now I would like to propose the following. We still have 20 minutes for brief discussion. How to live after this declaration? We could hear some answers to this question already, but as we are living in Ukraine, and if there are three clauses in this declaration concerning Ukraine, and concretely we are talking about uniatism. So my question is to Volodymyr. It is written in declaration that two heads of two churches, Petro Kirill and the Pope Francis, witness that the Christianity should develop. So what about Christianity in Russia now? Now we are talking about the other church communities, Greco-Catholic, religious organizations, other organizations. What do you think about it? What will happen in Russia, I can't tell. I can't foresee it. At least, according to the declaration, Orthodox and Catholics from now should look for the ways of peacekeeping process and should go through this historical burdens they had during these centuries and to find some ways for peaceful coexistence. So according to that, Catholics on the territory of Russian Federation are supposed to feel better, but Taras is right, because declaration is not a law. Declaration is a kind of intentions. And there were a lot of many documents of declarative nature that didn't influence to religious life at all. That's why I'm not sure that concerning Russia, this declaration will change something significantly in the confessional relationships. In the same way, in Ukraine, this declaration won't lead to some serious changes that now something will happen that didn't exist before. I think that religious life will continue in the existing paradigm. There won't be some radical changes, but still there are some things in declarations that everybody can use. For example, the clause number 25 about unity. They don't say unity is bad. They say about unitism, and it is it is written in italic, because if you're talking about the general logics of these clause, in the previous centuries there was such events that is bad. But now we can overcome it. We need to find the ways to solve it. And as for me, it would be desirable to use it to look for dialogue between Orthodox and Greek Catholics faithful. That is a paradox, but between Ukraine Orthodox Church and Greek Catholic Church there is no official theological dialogue. We are present in the global dialogue, but there is no dialogue between these two churches in Ukrainian context. In this clause gives us the ground to say that we have the sanctions from the Rome Catholic Church and Russian Orthodox Church to look for this dialogue. We can interpret this clause in this way. Ludmyla told that in this issue between the Greek Catholics, everything is defined. Nobody has doubts. Ludmyla left us, but here there is a room for discussion, because just look at the comments from the side of Russian side, because they say that the Pope told that the union is a sin. The next step is to stop the existence of union. So that's why everybody will see what they want to see. But I think we need to look at the last sentence of this clause, that Greek Catholics and Russian Orthodox should look for the ways for the dialogue. This is what's important for us. This fact is very interesting. From the side of Greek Catholic Church, there were numerous signals to such dialogue. If I'm not mistaken, the head of the Greek Catholics, His Grace Sviatoslav, was talking to the Moscow Patriarchate about this dialogue. And as for me, this dialogue could start from the prayer, but Greek Catholics didn't see anything in response. Sorry, maybe it's my subjective opinion as a journalist, but what about you? What do you think? Why this dialogue still didn't happen? And I would like other speakers to participate in this discussion as well, if you have something to say. Here there are a lot of different reasons for these complicated relations, because I can't just describe you briefly. even today in conservative environment of Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the attitude to declaration is negative because any approach to Catholics in this environment is betray of the Orthodox Church. And the big part of the flock blocks these signals because other people are looking at this part of the faithful. So from one side, it's very important that these words for peacekeeping process and approach, it's very important that they go the sanctions from the Pope and Patriarch. It's very important argument to build dialogue. On such an informal level with Greek Catholic Church, our discussion is rather open. I mean, scientific approaches, everything is more or less fine, but I want to be optimist. I hope this declaration will help us to move forward. Father Andriy, what do you think? Are you optimistic about declaration, about relationships, about renewal of the dialogue? I would like to return to the clause 26 of the declaration. I think that by signing Havana Declaration, the heads of both churches made exactly what heads of the Christian church should do it. The text appeals to the renewal of social harmony, to cooperation and to the peace. And also they ask the representatives of the church not to take part in the conflict in the country. And here, about optimistic approach to the declaration itself, I would like to say that these intentions are declared. Let's just do it. These intentions are very good. We need peace today. And on this level, these intentions were declared but if I'm not mistaken, the heads of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine are constantly talking about peace, and they declare peace, but because we have this declaration signed, maybe it would be nice to analyze some of them, and it would be our way to the peace. And it's not funny because we have a lot of witnesses that the representatives of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, with the weapons of their hands, are fighting together with the members of the illegal band formations. We also have witnesses that from the churches of this patriarchate there are shooting on Ukrainian positions. We know that the weapons is hidden in these churches. This information is not abstract. There are not examples of the priests that come from Russia to Ukraine and here they defend Russian world. You can find it in internet easily. There is a lot of information like this one. So again, we are talking about peace. If there is such a declaration, if there are such intentions declared by the head of the Russian Orthodox Church of Patriarch Kirill, let's just listen to him. Because you know the intentions are we are for peace, but this Christmas I was at Cherokee at the front line, and it was very hard for me to understand what motivation do these people have to shoot the position of the militaries of the armed forces of Ukraine on the 6th of January. I can't understand why they did it. And also I witnessed the events of 19th of January. It's a great Orthodox holiday. And I could see grad shellings in the Debaltseva area, and after that these shellings became constant. And all that happens at the background of peace declaration. So this important step was made. For one more time, the intentions of the head of the churches were declared that we need to find the way to peace. And the peace is in our hands, and it depends from the very clear understanding where is black, where is white, where the country is defended, where the troops of other country are breaking the order, are breaking the peace. And it leads to numerous human victims. As for me, declaration can be used today among the illegal banned formations, for example, or at the occupied territories of Donbass, or among the militaries of armed forces of Russian Federation. To have a look at the declaration of this invention signed by the head of their church. Father Petro, what do you think? What could be the logic, the steps to achieve peace based on the declaration that was signed in Havana regarding Ukraine?
As I've mentioned already, from my point of view, once they agreed about the meeting, it would be better to have the meeting without any declarations. The declaration was not timely. But once there is a declaration, we have what we have. And based on that, despite different interpretations of what is written there, we need to sit at the table of negotiations and refer to this declaration. We need to talk about our common future, about peace. We have some calls not to use religious factors to achieve peace. And what Father Andriy has mentioned, that first of all, the churches shouldn't be engaged into confrontation, into the war taking place in our land. I'm not a big optimist. I don't think that the declaration will help find peace. It will be one of declarative documents which will be referred to, because this joint declaration had to be the consequence of negotiations of the peace that should be established. People who are behind the patriarch, these conservatives, are not ready for the declaration. Some on the Catholic side also not ready. They believe that they met, and that means there will be peace all over the world. There should have been the meeting. The peaceful relations had to be established first, and then declaration made. And now I believe that next meetings are to be better prepared. If it's about, if they're discussing about Ukraine, then Ukrainian side should be involved. They talked about stopping persecutions of Christianity and stopping ruining the cathedrals when they were discussing Syria. But when they're discussing Ukraine, they need to maybe organize some round table. The Moscow Patriarchy, Kyiv Patriarchy, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church should be present, because otherwise the declaration will not bring any result, because interpretations will be more negative than positive. So in the future, there will be a lot of work. We need to do a lot of work to achieve peace. Thank you. It's interesting to mention that Greek Catholic Church reacted immediately at the declaration that was signed. It was said that they signed what they never discussed with us. They were writing about unions, but they did not ask about our position. They were talking about Greek Catholic Church without asking about what their position is. What do you believe, Victor? Why the Greek Catholic Church was again the object of discussion, but not the subject of discussion? Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is following the principle nothing about us without us. But we believe that in this meeting this principle was ignored. Again, I would like to say that in this declaration, in this meeting, the politicians, geopoliticians, that there's more geopolitics than theology, but the Moscow Patriarchy, from their side, it's just politics. If the Russian Orthodoxy wanted to take care of the Christians of the Middle East, they had to do that in 2013 when 2 metropolitans were kidnapped. But they did not develop the doctrine that was then proclaimed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation, that Russia returns to itself the role of protector of Christian people in the Middle East. It was clear to me that everyone would be reading what they want in this declaration. The MP, member of our committee, comes to me and he says, "Why do you allow Kyiv Patriarchy to serve in Sofia?" And I ask, should we give this permit to Moscow Patriarchy? But the Pope told you that they are bad. I don't know whether this is a big secret, but I saw one of the drafts of this document. I did not know that that will be the declaration. It was the document of Orthodox Catholic dialogue, which is developing from the time of meeting of Patriarch of Ihor and the Pope Paul VI. And that dialogue was stopped because the Orthodox side did not want to discuss anything but the problem of neotheism. And there were many meetings dedicated to that. There were awful, there was an awful wording there. They would impose that the Catholic side should refuse from any communication with any church communities who stepped aside from Moscow Patriarchy. That was back in the 14. It was about civil war in Ukraine and so on. Now we don't see it here, but see certain things. I believe that the positive part, the positive role of Havana Declaration or joint statement is that it woke up public opinion, woke up or made Orthodox and Catholics to become closer to each other. Maybe it will force the Ukrainian Council of Churches to come out of the purely Ukrainian context. This Ukrainian Council had to be present in European structures in Brussels and Strasbourg. And I believe that even though the declaration is directed towards splitting the Christians in Ukraine, but it will help consolidate the Christians. Thank you, Victor. And I would like to give the floor to the audience. Maybe you have some questions to our speakers. Such joint declaration could become the pretext.
В таком случае диалог для чего, я хотел бы спросить? То есть вы имеете в виду
So the dialogue for what? To create the local church in Ukraine. There are projects in which Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church will participate. That is my first question. Then the second question, I do not know, I would like to ask you. After the meeting, the Congress in Lviv in 1946, the Greek Catholics cancelled that. And Moscow Patriarchy did it condemn this Congress? And also I would like to ask, in the Roman Catholic Church, is there any reaction on that declaration? Thank you. The first question as to the objective of the possible dialogue between Orthodox and Greek Catholics. It's not about creating one united church, or it's not about uniting these two churches into single church. The objective of any dialogue is to find out what are the theological differences existing between us, and also clarification what were the problems that were dividing us in history, like this Lvivsky Congress of Beresteyska Unia. And the third objective of the dialogue could be clarification of the contemporary conflicts. If there is a conflict in this somewhere, it's better to resolve it in the framework of the dialogue. So it's about approximation of churches and about removing the conflict. As to Roman Congress, no official acts on the condemnation of that does not exist. On the other hand, in the church historiography, new assessments of that Congress prevail, and convocation. And they have decided on how was this Lviv convocation held and what were the mechanisms. But I haven't heard that there were attempts to cancel it by Orthodox Church. Brief question. Can we say that Moscow Patriarchy in Havana Declaration officially recognizes the right for existence for the Greek Catholic Church? I would like to emphasize that this item on official recognition of the right of Greek Catholics for existence is not any novation. It duplicates Balaman document of 1993. In 1993, Havana Declaration says that the communities which appeared in the result of union, they have the right to exist and they have the right to act. Now, the provisions of Balaman document were emphasized again, and they have been officially confirmed at the level of Moscow Patriarchy, because the representative of the Moscow Patriarchy was signing the Balaman document, and now the Patriarch signed it again. That's nothing new, it's just the repetition of what was declared in the beginning of the 90s. And the question to you, Father Petro, and the reaction of Roman Catholic side to declaration. I have the expert assessment before the meeting and after the meeting in Havana. George Weigel from the US, but mostly these are Greek Catholic. And so on and so forth.
If you're talking about Roman Catholic reactions, so the Pope himself, on his way from Mexico, French journalist asked him, he told him that Greek Catholics are disappointed, they feel themselves betrayed, and the Pope interpreted, the author of the declaration interpreted that the text of declaration, its discourse, is that the situation of Ukraine is not clear. There are different interpretations. But in the future, he hopes it will give its fruits. Politics of Vatican is not to be involved directly and openly to some conflicts, not to be on the side of any party, even if it's clear who is aggressor, who is victim. It's look for peace. This is our position. This is the first reaction of the Pope. And of course, many people in Ukraine don't like it. Yes, we are also searching for peace, but we need to defend our land as well. And also, as far as I noted, most of Roman Catholics like the declaration because they are living in the atmosphere of the Second Vatican Convocation. Because this is a meeting, the most important is that this meeting happened without any contacts, and for them, this meeting of Afinagor and the Paul VI and other popes and patriarchs, all these meetings, that's what they remember, Roman Catholics. And about details, not many people in Western Europe or in the Catholic world don't go into these details that we Ukrainians know, that we explore, because there was just a meeting between the Pope and the Moscow Patriarch, and that is a great joy for many people. Maybe there are some critical articles. Maybe George Weigel said that it wasn't what he expected. But in most cases, the evaluation of this meeting is positive. But I'm a little pessimistic about it. Also, I would like to give the floor to Taras Antoshevskiy. Taras, can you hear us? Yes, I do. Look, you evaluated the situation very well, the reaction of media audience on what happened in Havana Declaration itself. And now, could you please share your thoughts based on the analytics you have? And will this declaration help us to find the true peace in Ukraine? My answer won't be very serious. I'm like Stanislavski. I don't believe. I don't believe that both parties were sincere, because we are not talking about some general topics. We are talking about the lives of people. We are talking about the estimation of real events, the estimation of everything that happens. And if one party prepared documents stated that Russia as aggressor should confess to the side of Ukrainians for everything they did during this war and in the past, and other party, for example, signs the declaration, that's one thing. Or if, for example, Moscow side would prepare this document, Rome wouldn't accept it, not depending to what reaction it can lead in Ukraine. Also, I don't believe that these sides are sure the declaration will influence the relations. Because if you are talking about dialogue, I'm not talking the dialogue about the Ukrainian Orthodox and Greek Catholics of Ukraine. We are talking about the dialogue of the churches who signed this declaration. Because if we are talking about the dialogue of Ukrainian Orthodox Church and Greek Catholics, I can't see it on the high level. There is a dialogue of people who are reading theological literature, or military chaplains, or dialogue of the journalists who are not engaged into propaganda, but who are more or less objective. Also, there is dialogue between good people in Facebook, or on this level. There is dialogue. There will be dialogue. It doesn't depend on these declarations and other decisions on the high level, because it's general Christianic dialogue between brothers and sisters. I can't see at all any serious dialogue between the churches in Ukraine, because we can say about some kind of competitions and dialogue, because here there is a defense of some common interests, and going outside to these limits there is no dialogue. And all the attempts to make a dialogue when conflict started didn't lead to any results. So as this declaration can influence to the defense of some parties, and my colleagues told it already clearly, that everybody sees what he's ready to see in this declaration. For example, about St. Sophia Cathedral, or the new draft law about the registration of religious communities. And now they're trying to look to this draft law from the point of view of this declaration. And they say that Greek Catholic Church should be eliminated from the registration. So there are kind of marasmatic things happen. So the dialogue more in such an aspect to give birth to many thoughts, but it's a kind of mass monologue more than fruitful dialogue. And as for me, this declaration led to the discussion, but the discussion is on the closed level. It's not public. It's not official, but the dialogue happens on the level of social networks. The dialogue on the level of some unions. Because if Ukraine doesn't start defending itself on information level, unfortunately somebody else will speak from our side, or weapon, for example. But what is interesting for me? From Moscow side, very often there are statements like that the war in Ukraine or conflict, that Greek Catholics, the schism people are guilty in it. And the same blames we can see from the side of Kyiv metropolis to the side of Greek Catholics. If they keep on doing that without any ground, that in declaration we promise each other something, but other party doesn't do it, or will anybody remember this declaration on the high level? Because, you know, we are just common citizens. These issues are solved on other level. But they don't care in declaration. And that is the most interesting issue for me. Will the people who sign it, will they take it into consideration? But if there are some common problems, if there are some social common mass or something, that could be a good topic. And that that is the issue requiring the informational support, not to have illusion that first of all this declaration can solve our problems, and second, that somebody should solve our problems instead of us, and we are just waiting. We are just taking some passive position. Because we would like our community to know, with the help of media, about the decision taken on the high level. That it's important to know that the people from different confession can join and talk to each other. I don't want journalists to have some illusions that if you're talking about interconfessional relations, it means conflict. Thank you very much, Taras, for your evaluation. Our conference is finished, unfortunately, but to make good conclusions, I would like to hear blitz answer from you, 1 minute maximum, what to wait next. Vladimir, let's start from you. I told you already what we shouldn't wait for, some radical change. I agree with Taras. The paradigm we have, the human relations we have, they will keep on moving. And the declaration is a kind of roadmap for the church management. And we will see in the future how church management is ready for the next steps. Let's just do what is declared. Peace is declared. Let's work for peace. Let's work on peacekeeping process in the country. Father Petro, we can't wait for a long time because there is a war in Ukraine, and if you look to this declaration, we are not grown up enough to the level of this declaration, because according to it, we are brothers. We should look for a peace, but people keep on doing what they did before the declaration. So talking about situation in Ukraine, talking about war, notwithstanding the declaration, we should look for the ways to solve the conflict. The military should defend their country. The politicians should look for the ways to solve these problems. But talking about the unity of the churches, I also can't see that our churches are grown up to be united. Especially I'm talking about the Orthodox Church, because they are more conservative, and maybe they will understand this declaration in 10, 20, 30 years. They will understand that we are brothers according to the declarations. Catholics, they are naive, or maybe they don't understand that such a unity won't come tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. That's why us, like small kids, will just grow up to the phrases of this declaration. It just came before we were ready for it. Really, we are brothers, but these brothers have separate worlds, separate environments, separate specifics and geopolitical situation. That's why, notwithstanding the declaration, we as Christians, we should look ways for unity in Ukraine, in political, in social aspect, how to build up the peace in Ukraine. I think Christians of Ukraine should speak loudly. We can see that Christianity is going to the south. The Pope Francis knows better the global south as our region. That's why he and all the world should know first where is Ukraine and who are the Christians of Ukraine. We need to remind the Pope how he behaved and what he told during the conflict between Argentina and Great Britain for Falkland Islands. How he defended his countries and freedom and territorial integrity. And the last word from Taras. We just need to do the good things written in the declaration. Those who signed it should do it first of all. And still there is a room for the hard work, and I hope that all these problems will be solved in the world. Thank you very much for your evaluation. Gentlemen, I'm very grateful to you for this discussion, and I would like to wish that this declaration will be the first step, and I really want churches to look for the ways, the church for the dialogue, and let's start from the common prayer, and all the rest will come. Thank you very much for the discussion. Thanks to Ukraine Crisis Media Center for the place, and see you next time.